So moving on to our third topic, we're going to be talking about consumerism and how our shopping habits has an impact on the climate. And so for this topic, we'll be having a special speaker from all the way from the East Coast, actually, to talk a little bit about how her business is a little bit different compared to most others.
Okay, industry pollution. So, industry pollution is any type of polluting that can be immediately traced back to the source, which would be industrial manufacturers. So, that would be like large scale manufacturing, heavy metal making, and oil and grease companies. Also, ways that you can personally help is research and educate yourself um, on what companies are very detrimental. Also, if possible, avoid these large manufacturing companies. And if not, just educate others because it's very difficult to avoid these because not everyone has the amount of accessibility in their community. So it's very hard to shop sustainably. So just maintain an open mind when discussing this topic.
And now we're going to be hearing from our guest speaker, Natalia Trevino Amaro, who's a business owner of an ethical small business called Natalia Trevino Amaro, which produces fashionable size inclusive clothing while remaining sustainable and environmentally friendly.
Hello. Am I good to talk now? Okay. Hi, I'm Natalia. So I'm going to talk to you guys about just consumerism and just the fashion industry in general, things that I've learned in my journey of being in the industry and whatnot. So obviously the biggest issue in terms of sustainability within the industry is fast fashion, which we all know. So just to give you quick background on exact definitions and whatnot, by Google search, the first definition that comes up is an inexpensive clothing produced rapidly by mass market retailers in response to the latest trends. So that's obviously brands like Forever 21 or Fashion Nova, H&M, Zara, Princess Polly, everything that we all know and unfortunately love, but it's unknown which one was like the first one to pop up, but H&M and Zara were kind of like the first to come up, I think around the 80s. And then they came to the US in the 90s and 2000s. And then that really blew up in the early 2000s and 2010s as a whole. So I think that the idea of fast fashion seems really nice because it's affordable and it's trendy. And obviously that's really appealing to all of us because not everybody can spend that much money on nice clothing. But the environmental effects of it are so incredibly detrimental that we cannot just ignore it. So I'll give you guys some just like straight facts and things to just think about that I think the average person just doesn't know or realize. So the fashion industry used to only have 2 collections a year, which was spring and summer, fall, winter, and that was it. But now places like Zara produce 24 collections a year, which is roughly a collection every 2 weeks, which is way more than any of us can keep up with, obviously, because nobody can just dispose of their closet every 2 weeks to get the newest, trendiest pieces. And obviously that is obviously a lot of overconsumption, but also just overproduction as a whole, which is really dangerous to the industry and just to the environment. And the average person nowadays only wears clothing 7 times before throwing it out or donating it, which is really not that much at all. But if I think of it in terms of what I wear, like sometimes there are times that I don't wear something that often because it's like, oh, I don't want to outfit repeat, or like I've already posted a picture in it, or whatever it may be. So like I feel like that's very true, and I definitely get rid of stuff if I've only worn it like once or twice. But even if we're talking about like donating clothing, which seems like a wonderful thing to do, it is, but also only about 30% of our clothing actually ends up donated, and the majority of it gets thrown out, which is something that also doesn't get talked about too much, like the life cycle of your clothing once you get to donating it or to giving it away or whatever. So if you don't know about like how like donating places go, like places like Goodwill and stuff, once you send stuff there or like you donate stuff, If it doesn't sell, then it goes to the next step, which is like a Goodwill outlet or whatever, because obviously they're still stores, they're still businesses, and they need to keep their inventory like new and fresh. So then it goes to Goodwill outlets, which are those type of places where you can get like a full, like, I don't know, pound of clothes for like $1 or something like that. I don't know what the actual like thing is, but very, very cheap. And if it doesn't sell there, then those clothes get sent overseas, usually to places like Africa, for them to sell. And it doesn't even get donated there. They actually sell it over there. So it doesn't even get donated, which is really unfortunate. But it really hurts their environments because we're basically using them as landfills and being like, okay, we don't want all these clothes. We're going to just give them to you and like you can deal with them. And they have way too many clothes they can barely deal with, and it hurts their economy as well. But that's a whole other problem. But it ends up just being like piles of clothes that try to get burnt, but like they don't really biodegrade or like come down very well. So it's really hard to actually like burn them. And also most of them are made from synthetic materials, which are basically plastic, and burning plastic is just not good for anybody. And we all know that as well. So that's also a big issue, is materials in the fashion industry. I think we can talk about overproduction a lot, and that's something that's very apparent, just like the amount of clothing that is in the world right now, but also just the materials that we use are really harmful as well. And that's something that doesn't get talked about as much. But just to break it down, about 60% of our clothing is made from synthetic materials. Like, I'm sure we all are wearing something right now that has polyester in it because it's just the cheapest material for production. And it's just very common nowadays, unfortunately. But it's really, really harmful because when we wash things like polyester, microfibers get put out into our water, which are really hard to filter through. So then those microfibers, which are essentially little tiny pieces of plastic, get released into the ocean. And there's about like 500,000 tons of plastic fibers that get released into the ocean each year, and 35% of those are from clothing, which is a really large amount. And obviously that also ends up in our drinking water and stuff, so it's dangerous for us as well as humans. And even just on polluting and water and all of that, the fashion industry is the second largest consumer of water worldwide. So to produce something like a cotton t-shirt, which again, we all definitely have, it takes about 700 gallons of water to produce just one. And then for jeans, it takes about 2,000 gallons of water to produce just a pair of jeans, which is a ridiculous amount. That's literally about like enough for a person to consume 8 cups a day for 10 years, which is a very, very long time. And obviously we can also talk about like dyeing and how that is a really large water polluter as well. But I'm not going to get too much into that because I think we can just like go on and on for days about all the awful things that the fashion industry does. But obviously all of this is really intimidating because it feels like you cannot do anything about it, and there's just no way to combat it, because even sustainable brands like have to use dyes if they want something new and trendy, or like at some point you're probably going to have some sort of synthetic fiber in there. So it's really hard to completely, I guess, get rid of the problems, but you can definitely reduce it. So that is where slow fashion comes in, which is kind of like a newer thing that's coming up, which I think is really good. So by quick Google definition, slow fashion is the movement of designing, creating, and buying garments for quality and longevity. It encourages slower production schedules, fair wages, lower carbon footprints, and ideally zero waste. So I personally have my own slow fashion brand, and I'm going to share with you guys like what I do personally to combat it. So I start obviously with materials. I try to source materials sustainably. So that is me buying dead stock fabrics, which are like leftover fabrics from big manufacturers. I use personal scraps just that I've had like for years because I, went to fashion school and whatnot. I use like scraps from friends. Sometimes they'll give me random stuff. If they cut a pair of jeans into shorts, they'll just give me like the leftover leg. And I'm like, sure, I'll make something out of it, I guess. And then if I do buy actual fabrics, like new fabrics, I try to only buy like natural fiber fabrics. Try to stay away from all the synthetics, even though it is a lot more expensive, but gotta do what you gotta do, And then I also try to have a whole zero waste production system. So I don't throw out any of my materials. I reuse every single scrap I possibly can. Any big scraps, I'll like patchwork them. Any small scraps, I try to make new textiles out of. And additionally, everything's made to order. So there's no excess inventory. There's no extras at the end of the season, nothing like that. It's also just allows for size inclusivity, but that, you know, is beside the point. And I produce everything myself, so I don't have a big team. I don't have like cheap labor. Everything is really slow, obviously, because it's just one person, it's small batches, and it reduces just waste and combats anything that the fast fashion industry is doing. And though it seems like there's not a lot of brands that do this as well, there are quite a few. I just think they're hard to find. The leading brand that I've noticed is And Again. I think they're really cool. They're more on a luxury level. Like, I definitely cannot afford them whatsoever, but I think they're setting a really good example for other brands. So I think that shows like the rest of us and other brands that it is definitely possible, which I think is really cool. But obviously, we also need to talk about how we can individually combat these things. If you don't have a brand, obviously you can't do these things, but like as an individual, there's definitely a lot of ways you can help kind of reduce the waste or just make the industry better, which, like, first of all, just wear what you have. I think it's so easy for us to want to like buy from sustainable brands and like do all these things right away, but realistically the most sustainable thing you can do is just wear what you already have, what's already in your closet, repeat all the outfits, get creative, you know. If you are going to buy, like, try to thrift first. If you don't have any good thrifting around you or whatever, just simply like buying less is also really good, because I think, again, like, sustainable brands are expensive, so I understand it's not in anybody's or everybody's reach. So simply just buying less also does a lot, even if it has to be from fast fashion brands or anything like that, because I know obviously affordability and stuff. Obviously support your local brands, your local like sustainable brands, or even just on social media, it can help a lot to support sustainable brands, just because if you help their engagement, it helps them, their following, and then it helps like them reach a bigger audience and whatnot. That is also a really good way to help, even if you're not like monetarily helping. And obviously, like you guys said earlier, I think that you need to inform yourself all the time. I think it's really important to do research, especially in terms of sustainability, when it's something so new and there's always new things going on with it and new discoveries and whatnot. So just continue to inform yourself and educate those around you into what you can do, what the industry is doing, because we're all part of it, whether you're like into fashion or not. Everybody wears clothes, so we're all part of the problem and we all need to help combat it. So that's all I have for you guys. If you guys want to ever, like, I don't know, contact me for anything, feel free to DM me on Instagram. I usually always answer. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can find me at Natalia Trevino Amaro, and obviously at my shop too. Everything is just my name, so feel free to hit me up.